The Sober Sojourn's 12 Steps and Passport Stamps podcast features recovered men and women who are practicing members of Alcoholics Anonymous. We do not claim to represent Alcoholics Anonymous or any 12-step program. We are friends gathered to discuss our experience in recovery. The discussions in this podcast represent our own individual experiences and opinions as of today. You can reach us at our email address, which is sobersojournspodcast@gmail.com, or on Instagram at OyveyAA and Such a Sally. We would love to hear from you. Our aim is to try to be helpful by sharing the realities of our recovery, how we have recovered and are trudging the road of happy destiny wherever we go.
Pirate Mike and OyveyAA presents The Sober Sojourns, 12 Steps and Passport Stamps podcast.
Okay. First episode of the podcast. How's it going?
It's going good. I am OyveyAA.
And I am Pirate Mike.
This is great.
This is exciting. Yeah.
I'm very excited. I feel like I want to apologize to anyone who may have thought I'm a Hasidic Jewish man.
We've lost half the listeners immediately.
That's it. They're gone.
Bamboozled. She doesn't sound anything like what we see in the picture.
I am not a rabbi. I'm sorry. I had a mutual friend of ours say to me, wouldn't it be amazing if you got sponsees out of this meme thing? And I feel like I'll be equally delighted if anyone thought I was a rabbi for a split second.
Well, at least we'll at least get some kind of direct message where people are confused and asking, right? But we got at least the back half of it. So in this case, this is really exciting for me too. And I mean, one thing that we both share experience-wise is the whole getting sober in or living in sobriety in a place that is not, native country. No?
Yeah, I think that was one of the reasons why we kind of started doing this. I think it was pretty clear once you and I started getting to know each other that this is a main thing that we both share. I find this podcast to be an excuse to speak with you because the time difference is insane. How many hours are we apart right now? Just so people will understand.
Well, it's night here and it's day over there, but I think we said it was 14 or 16 hours, something like that. It doesn't really matter.
Fucking crazy, dude.
Is it though? Is it really? I guess it is.
I've had enough experience with this, but I've never had more than 10 hours.
Okay.
Time difference with anyone. So this is an excuse to do this. Again, this is he's saying it's day. It's early morning here. And it's nighttime where you are.
Right.
This is not noon here or something.
Fair. It's an hour and a half to midnight where I am. Yeah. And you're
also, I have a question
morning
for you,
coffee.
Pirate Mike, though.
Yeah.
This is important. Do you feel like this podcast name is too long?
If we break it up before and after, between the colon, then I think it's okay. But yeah, I guess if I do have to say that whole name the whole time. But it's I know what to give up. I mean, you're the one who okay, so now I feel like the listeners need the backstory. So
of how this went down.
I know my friend Vey here enlisted the help of AI to try to come up with a great podcast name. And so this monstrosity that we're dealing with now is combination of 3 different ones that we couldn't pick from. And I refuse to try to narrow it down anymore. So it is what it is. Do you not
it's the monster child of AI. By the way, ChatGPT is getting probably 20 cents every time we say it.
Oh, nice.
That name.
Yeah. We're gonna put it through college.
Yeah. I feel like though at this point we have so much stuff backstage that are counting on this. We have so much infrastructure set up with that stupid ass name that we fucked ourselves over.
I could
Ay.
feel it. I could feel it. At one point, you were like, I don't want to put any more work on this. We haven't even hit record yet.
Yeah, no, I think we were both just really, really excited about this. Is this also the part where I just I think I should give a disclaimer about my grammar? Because my grammar is not as good as I would like it to be. So this is a disclaimer to all grammar Nazis, or regular Nazis, whatever,
Or
whatever,
regular Nazis.
whatever kind of Nazi you want to identify as. I am Jewish and I make horrible grammar mistakes. Pirate Mike, why won't you take it away now?
I think that's a fair disclaimer. We want to be sensitive to all different kinds of Nazis. That's so uncomfortable to say.
I feel like, yeah, people hopefully will get the tone at
Yeah.
this first recording that this is very humoristic. I actually had this conversation with a a mutual friend of ours of how, for me, comedy and humor, even if it's only amusing to me, is a great way to process whatever it is I'm going through and
Yeah.
whatever trauma I'm going through. And I think being a foreigner or being a minority out in the world is just a part of that. So, yes, it is my right, and I will defend it.
For sure. And
Yeah.
this specific kind of comedy, I remember, so I got sober in the States, right? That is not my country of origin. And but I share, like, someone who I worked with, our native countries' histories share a common colonizer. And we bonded over that, you know, with the same kind of
Yeah.
humor. It was like, oh, they fucked you over too? Yeah, right on. It's like we're brothers.
Yeah, I feel that was like the connection between me and you is that we're both foreigners. Like we share the same group of friends, but we're both very we raise up the ethnic
We do.
scent. Ethnic scent, what the fuck am I saying?
I like
In this
that.
group of people, and I love that group of people, right? Like, don't get me wrong. Um, but I think it's just, as you said, it's like it's something you bond over. Um, Maybe this is what trauma bonding is. I don't know.
That doesn't take a dark turn at all. Maybe it is.
No,
But it's
maybe it is.
but it's yeah, no, it makes sense. I think anybody who has a similar experience will be able to relate because there's like the majority and minority in terms of like who you are in the crowd, but there's also like culturally it can be like that. And so I don't know, the best way to describe it is probably like, you know, we live in like a McDonald's world, so to speak.
Wait, I don't understand the
You,
metaphor,
you
please.
don't?
No,
It's
analyze it for me.
very, I mean, fuck it. It's like it gets very US centric
There,
in terms
oh,
of
there
like
it
the
is.
view, right? And sometimes it's like, oh, well, that's nice, but you know, I don't relate like 100%. But sure.
May I like remind you that the episode where we shit on the US is not scheduled for this week.
So that's all I'm gonna say. So how did you end up at the Greenland Ice Cap?
Oh my God. Yeah. I did not relapse and die when I left my country of origin.
Hmm.
Even though that was what I was specifically told that was gonna happen. Um, so like the backstory, just tip of the iceberg, pun intended for sure. Is that so I'm from Israel, if that isn't obvious by the thick accent. Uh, I was born and raised. Oh God, I'm not gonna do it. It's such a
That's
bad joke.
You're not Japanese? What are we doing? Everything I know is a lie.
No, I'm sorry. I'm not from the US either. I have gotten so many weird things. I love that this is getting derailed, but people have told me I'm from every country in the world, and it's always crusty ass old timers
Go.
being inappropriate and being like, I had someone at the end of a meeting just like point its finger at me. It wasn't like half a second until like after finishing the Serenity Prayer. And it was like, you're Irish. And I'm like, okay. Oh man.
He's never heard an Irish accent in his fucking life.
I mean, I don't know. I really don't know what it was. Maybe the R. I'm not sure.
They
I
are.
love how I'm trying to defend this like old timer that I like.
But it's well intentioned, right? Like, I mean, I told you how um I'm since I'm Asian and I was the only one who
Yes.
fit that description, right? When I first got sober, anytime there was another Asian in the meeting, people thought they were being helpful by trying to introduce us to each other. Or like, do you know this guy? Do you know Yoshi? And I'm like, no, but I'm sure he's a fine guy and it'd be nice to meet him one day.
It is well intentioned, but it's like I don't think people understand that it's I don't know if I would go and say it's racist because but it's just odd. It's
Separate
an
episode.
odd thing. And I think yeah, and I think like if again, you know what? I'm not gonna say because I'll end up shitting on the States again. So I'm gonna go back from that line of discussion. But yeah,
Oh no, you don't know what to say. There's
no,
nothing else I can say without shitting on it.
nope, no. This is goodbye, everyone. No, I think I'll go back to the story that got derailed about
Okay, go
how
ahead.
I
Yeah.
got into the green. Was it the Greenland Ice Caps? Is that what it said in the big book?
Yeah. Is it
Pirate Mike,
101?
do you mind reading this for us as and we will meditate on that before we
Sure. Yeah, I think we missed out on the 2 minutes of silent meditation, but yeah, okay.
yeah. So you're
So
gonna read from Living Sober, right?
I am going to read from Living Sober. This is after they tell us to eat chocolate whenever we feel a craving coming on
Yeah, thank you.
in Living Sober. Can we do an episode on that? I just want an hour of like shitting on Living Sober because I haven't done that anywhere yet.
I feel like if you give me an hour to shit on NA, which I say to John Barleycorn, but the main reason I haven't been on the podcast, I think, is probably like blood libel reasons.
That might be the barrier. Yeah, you're right.
No, but honestly, it's like if anyone hasn't realized this yet, this is probably an unpaid ad for a podcast greater than yourself. So please
Right.
stop listening to us. Go listen to Pirate Mike's episode on We Agnostics. It's fucking amazing. We love those guys so
We love
much.
those guys so much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we really do. I can't wait to promptly admit my wrongs on that blood libel thing.
They'll be there to hear the inventory. Yeah.
Oh shit. Okay, this is going great.
So page 101. First full paragraph says we meet these conditions every day. What conditions do you ask? The conditions of just having liquor all over around us in everyday life. An alcoholic who cannot meet them still has an alcoholic mind. There is something the matter with his spiritual status. His only chance for sobriety would be some place like the Greenland Ice Cap. And even there, an Eskimo might turn up with a bottle of scotch and ruin everything. Ask any woman who has sent her husband to distant places on the theory he would escape the alcohol problem. We don't really say Eskimo anymore, but there you go.
I'm sorry, is it politically incorrect? Did I miss something?
That's what I heard, or at
Oh,
least that's what they told me.
oh wow.
But
Okay.
I think we get the picture.
Yeah, we do. It's such a powerful thing reading it now from like where I'm at today. Again, when and I say it with all the love in the world, because I've gotten a lot out of NA, but I got clean in NA in Israel, and I fondly refer to it as the NA death cult of Israel because it was so so recovery, like the recovery was so much like fellowship based. And I think it's just an NA thing. I'm not sure what it is. I think it's just very direct, but I've gotten clean there and it takes like just like a little background in NA, it takes a long time to work steps. They have this like step working guide and it's like 117 pages or whatever. It's
Oh,
way too
lovely.
long. It's like 30 questions for like fucking step and by the time I left Israel, I had like over a year, and I was like in the second step, and I was not
Jesus
doing
Christ.
well. I know. I was like, I wasn't using anything and I wasn't drinking, but I certainly wasn't happy, and I certainly wasn't in a good mental space. And I decided to leave. I was young. I was 22 at the time, and I wanted to go travel, which is something 22-year-olds want to do, right? And I was I kept hearing this talk about freedom in the rooms, and I'm like, what freedom? Like, I don't want to sit here with you like old people. Sorry, like not to be ageist. But like, what do I have in common with you? What is this freedom you're talking about? So I got up on a plane. It was 18 hours, um, to the other side of the world. I thought I was gonna die. People told me you were gonna die. I had friendships like totally like ruined because of this thing that I decided to do against all advice. But something
Hmm.
called me to do it. And here we are, like years later, right?
That's amazing. I mean, I have respect for anybody who makes that decision to like strap on a bag and just leave home,
Mm,
right? I think that, I mean, I did it for different reasons. Like it was my first major geographic and I was still drinking, but you know, the distance that I've been able to travel since that first journey, right, has been life shaping and life changing.
mm,
And I can relate to what you were saying about I remember my first year, getting sober and I was in the US and at that time, alcohol ruining or my alcoholism ruining my life or leading to that point meant that I was on my own in a foreign country. I didn't have any immediate family or close relatives near me. Um,
mm,
yeah, I ruined a marriage, and so I was like on my own again, and it very much felt like starting from scratch, even though I already had like the basic stuff set up, social security number, bank account, whatever, but it didn't seem like there was a lot of support. And so in my first year, I remember this one guy who was getting ready to move across the country from LA. And he was deathly afraid, right? He was like crying in meetings, talking about how he's
mm,
scared because he's not going to have, his group, the group support, and like, what if he relapses? And it was a real thing. And I was sad and scared for him. And then years later, when I made my own decision to like my family and I, we moved back to, I'll stop saying country of origin because I think, I mean, it's gonna like I'm in the Philippines, right? And um, it was all warning and it was all fear. Everyone was like,
mm.
you know, remember this guy? He moved to the Philippines. It was like, in a few short months, he relapsed and he was knee deep in cocaine and hookers and booze. And I was like, okay, I know, because that's, there's a lot of that here. But that was the
Yeah.
fear. It's like if I move out of the safety of the little square that was the Alano Club and the people therein, that I wouldn't be able to stay sober. And it wasn't until, and tip of the hat to people like the guys from Podcast Greater Than Yourself, right? That it's like I got to take a look in the book again
Mm.
and remove a lot of what I'd heard in fellowship. And it's like, oh wait, so you guys aren't the ones actually keeping me sober? Like picking up cigarette butts in like an empty parking lot, or shit like that, like isn't keeping me sober. It's actually something else.
No, it's well, yeah, I mean, you said it, right? I think it's all kind of based on fellowship-based sobriety, and you are going to keep me sober. And I think that was why I got all these warnings. Not that I had enough experience with step work at the time, right? I got really lucky because when I landed in Costa Rica, like I immediately went into an AA meeting because, you know, in the Middle East, we have NA
Mm,
and AA is very prevalent in the world. I got into an AA meeting. I met my now sponsor and we did this thing. And then my whole travel, my whole backpacking changed. But again, going back to this thing, like fellowship keeps us sober, right? Like meetings don't keep me sober. And I've had to be deprogrammed from that.
right.
So, Pirate Mike, let me ask you this. What keeps you sober?
God does.
There we go. So, if God keeps you sober, maybe it's safe to assume that God can exist out of Philippines or out of Israel or out of
Right.
wherever you are. Um, and that's what it is. And also, it's a law of nature, right? I think that's the thing that this passage refers to. We cannot avoid the world, nor should we have a reason to,
Mhm.
if we live on this spiritual basis and we live in a practice of 10, 11, and 12, or, you know, all of all of those stuff. And there would be drugs and alcohol everywhere. It's a law of nature. Drugs, alcohol, and hookers, probably.
Hookers are definitely a law of nature.
Exist everywhere. I've never had a hooker problem, just to like make it plainly obvious. Uh,
That's good to know. No hookers have been troublesome in the making of this podcast.
no,
There's a
no.
there's a line in a vision for you that you made me think about. And I know like the big book nerds are, so disclaimer, I know I'm taking this out of context, but I like it for what it is, so fuck you. Um, on 158, right? They're like in the middle of a story that's being told. There's the idea that God ought to be able to do anything.
Yeah.
And it's such a powerful statement for me today when I think about my own recovery, not just sobriety. Um, because yeah, you mentioned how like you were a little more than a year and you were on your second step. Um, I mean, I still think I did the steps. Like it took me a little long, it took me a little while, like about a year to get through the steps in AA. But even with that, it was like the quality of it is not the same as it is today, right? I mean, 10, 11, and 12, um, from what I remember, because I don't want to assign blame to anyone, like my first sponsor or anything, but from what I
Mhm.
remember, the experience was like step 10, don't be an asshole, right? Step 11, you know how to pray and meditate, right? Go. Step 12, go get a sponsee. And that was kind of, it just seemed very quick and maybe it's supposed to be, but um what I was relying on at the time made it so that like I just needed somebody to walk me through the book a little more, I think. And I definitely didn't have the motivation to do that on my own.
Mm.
Um, and you lead by example, right? So in my case, oh fuck, I guess I am assigning blame. Like I didn't, I wasn't surrounded by people who were like getting into the book as much as I am now. And so I thought, okay, so we're just kind of winging it. And so God ought to be able to do everything for a long time without even thinking about it. That meant sobriety from alcohol to me. I was not applying the God solution to other parts of my life. And that's where I was still suffering. You talked about still being in some kind of pain, um, even though you were clean for a certain amount of time. And that went on for years for me. And I didn't understand. I just
Mm.
thought, oh, I still have an anger problem. I still have these kind of secrets or whatever, but that's just human condition. I don't really want to share about it or inventory it anyway. I'll just act like a good guy. And eventually, the fake it till I make it is gonna smooth things out.
Yeah.
And it didn't.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, I just remember that. I remember the fake it till you make it and thinking that there was something wrong with me or my willpower,
Right.
you know? Um, and yeah, and I think I said that now it's been a lot of being deprogrammed from that fear-driven motives. I sometimes forget what transpired in the last few years when I get into my own self-reliant fear. I'm like, oh, how am I gonna do this thing? And like I forget, what my higher power did for me and what I'm here to do for my higher power. And yeah, I've had many wild experiences just backpacking, right?
Hmm.
Like I was 22, I was backpacking in like weird ass places. I was alone. It comes with, it's a journey of self-discovery, if you like, to backpack alone. At the same time, I was sober and I had this newly kind of a very fragile sense of what God is to me. Um, so it was all just a wonderful, wonderful journey. I tend to shit on meetings a lot. I don't particularly go to a lot of meetings now, but I went to so many meetings when I was backpacking. I went from AA meeting to AA meeting, and I think that was really a huge part of what I needed to do. First of all, I saw the fellowship around the world.
Hmm.
I saw this kind of meeting, that kind of meeting, this language, that language. I saw a lot of expats who had some interesting takes because they did this thing. They left their little clubhouse, and moved to Europe or whatever. But yeah, just so many interesting experiences. Also, a little travel hack if you want to travel cheap, Pirate Mike, just travel in AA.
What do you mean?
So this is a secret that I've been keeping,
I'm
gatekeeping,
so excited.
is that when I went to like a new city, sometimes I had like accommodations in this hostel for like 2 days, right? I didn't know what was going to happen. And I went to the local meeting, the local fellowship, right? There's locals there. And then they're like, oh, come sleep on my couch. I have a spare room. And I ended up, people ask me, how do you travel? How do you do this? How do you make money doing this if you travel full time? I'm like, well, a big amount of it, was staying at AAs. I feel like such a bad person saying it. It was never my intention, but I ended up
No.
meeting so many wonderful people, and making friends and making roommates and, just being a part of this thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is remarkable because, I mean, the audience will not be able to tell this, but it's remarkable that you've been able to do all of that because you absolutely look like somebody who would murder me in my sleep, right? And yet people trust you. No, I think it's great that you had that experience, but
I
it
look very
helps.
scary. It's the
You,
Jewish horns. I
yeah,
hide them with all that hair.
yeah.
There we go. Parent Mike, could we get like an audio cue for first racist joke? I feel like we're at the second or third by now, but
I'm sure we've exceeded even those numbers. We're not aware of how offensive we actually are.
I'm allowed to do this. Fuck
Yeah.
you. What was the first thing? You know what I remember now is that we talked about colonization,
Yeah.
and do you remember that? Do you remember that conversation where you shared something about Spanish colonization, and I was like, "Oh, I get it." And I refer. Do you remember that? No.
Was it the names? You're talking about the names?
Yeah, like the last names.
Yeah. That was my joke because we were a Spanish colony. And so my friend who I bonded over because of the common colonizer, they were curious, right? They're always curious, like, how do you look like the way that you do? And yet you have this like surname that doesn't sound like anything that you look like. And so my
Mm.
long running joke was like, well, I don't know actually, because I can't trace it more than a couple of generations. So let's just say it's my slave name. And it's so funny to me every time I say it. And it makes, depending on who I'm talking to, it can make people so uncomfortable. But
It is so funny, dude.
I feel like it's kind of true. People landed on like a bunch of islands and it's like, hey, we just, you have your own thing going, but guess what? Here's Jesus. And also, you are no longer this name that we can't pronounce. Here's a set of names that you'll be known by for generations to come. And here we go.
Oh my God. I love that I mean, I'm not surprised that this podcast has now turned into colonization 101. Um, but yeah, I feel like when we spoke about this, you told me about the surname, and I told you, yeah, like there's so much. I mean, I certainly get it for many reasons, like the colonization thing. It's the same, you don't have you have like a different sounding surname. I don't have a great grandmother. It all
It's all the same. That's the trauma bonding.
it is the trauma bonding. But I think that's the thing. Like you go and and I kind of want to hear more about your experiences, like quote unquote, like a foreigner,
Yeah.
in AA, because I think it's such a niche thing. I make niche memes about being Jewish in AA. It's such a niche fucking thing. Because I hear the weirdest shit as a Jewish girl, and I hear the weirdest shit as a Jewish girl in AA.
What is the
You
weirdest
know,
shit that you've heard?
dude, I've had, oh my God, okay,
Wait,
I feel like we need more time on this.
yeah? I mean, when you say weird, do you actually mean pervy? Because if so, then I roll that back. I don't know if I'm ready for that.
I mean, is I don't know, is Pervy being like, let me talk to you about the Book of Revelation and how your people will like be, the catalyst for whatever. And I'm like, dude, can we just
No.
talk about the third step? Like, are we, what are we doing? Like, and I think it's just, yeah, you get weird reactions. And I think that's just what happens when you sound different and look different. I do not regret for a second leaving my country and being a part of more of a global fellowship and being a foreigner. In a way, it's comfortable for me. In a way, it almost strengthens my identity, my ethnic identity, my religion. Um, but also sometimes it can be really uncomfortable, and it can feel almost unsafe. But we'll get to my neo-Nazi experiences in the US in the
A
next
future
episode of
episode?
yeah.
That's a promise. We're gonna
And
get that's the audience retention
and
right there.
that's an OyveyAA promise. But no, Pirate Mike, like honestly, I would love to hear about your experience because what differentiate us, which people I don't think understand, or because race outside or like in the US is very black and white,
Yeah,
pun intended, right? And race is a spectrum. Um, for me, you cannot see that I'm Jewish, but it's a huge part of my ethnic, cultural, like, and I'm also Middle Eastern. So there's this whole thing, right?
right.
This heavy thing that I carry with me, but I don't present as such. So, only when people hear me speak, they're like, oh, where are you from? But I think your experience might be different and even more difficult.
It's I mean, different in the sense that like it's we're talking about an experience, right, that's being filtered
Yeah.
through a very specific lens or pair of eyes, right? And um, so I get an opportunity to circle back to the McDonald's metaphor. But like the difference I think is has to do with also just the different stereotypes that I fall into. Um,
Yeah.
so one of the reasons why I was really excited to do this with you is the fact that you do have the experience of someone who left their backyard, so to speak, right? And it's something that is touched upon in the book, but there's not a lot of people who share about that in the rooms, and it matters.
Mm.
It's a very practical program, and so if I extend that idea of practicality, it's one thing to be able to say, like, if let's pretend I'm back in my old home group in LA. It's one thing to be able to kick back and say, yeah, obviously you can stay sober no matter where you are in the world. God has no limits. Sure, that's a given. But to actually venture out and then experience that in practice is a completely different thing. Like you don't know shit until you've actually been there,
Oh
right? Like
yeah.
I don't want to shit on anyone who decides to stay home, and that's not my intention at all. I'm just saying that um, without thinking about it, there's a convenience um, that comes with being able to take home with you. And this is where I go back to McDonald's. So my whole thing on McDonald's and the Starbucks of the world, right, is like people go to a place that's foreign and scary, and then almost immediately it's like, well, how can I bring home here? And
And then
that's
they
what
go
you
have
get,
a soy cappuccino,
right? Like we have
which is
a
my higher power.
that's a good higher power. We have an entire
All right.
city that's been developed over the course of like the last 10 years to be
Mm.
expat friendly. And it's
Yeah.
very nice and it looks very developed, right? And I've met people who, because we get, here in this corner of the world, like it's a very, we get a lot of transients. So people in recovery who are like flying in and out. And that's a very different experience, but they'll stay in that place and then, I'll meet some of them in the meetings and they'll be like, oh yeah, it's really nice that I get to experience like the real Philippines. And it's like, dude, this is not the real Philippines. We walk like 10 minutes outside of that city's borders, and then it's like, oh, this is the real Philippines. It's getting kind of rough. And I'm like, we're not even in the rough part yet. I mean,
Oh wow.
backpackers and the hostel life, people who do that, they get to see a little bit more of what it's like in the wild. Um, but there are definitely some places that are constructed to make it comfortable for people who come from developed nations, so they don't have to feel like they're too far from home. And that's a luxury and a privilege. Um, but it's also a bubble.
That is such an interesting take. I mean, when we travel, or at least, my experiences was in most countries I went to English speaking AA. So you immediately get catapulted into this expat American experience of the place.
Yeah.
Um, Not that, I've had a lot of, I saw a lot of people, from the country go to the English speaking AA, but I think you and I have like distinctively different experiences right now because you went back and you are now back in your country of origin. I am not back and am not planning to go back for
Yeah.
obvious reasons that we shall not mention in this podcast.
Next episode.
Yeah, but Pirate Mike is cringing so hard right now. He's like, please don't do it. I'm not gonna do it. DM me is all I'm gonna
to
say.
to learn more.
To learn more, DM me at OyveyAA. No, but again, and I don't want to sell a fairy tale also about like, and I think you kind of touched on that, if I understood correctly, is that traveling in this program is like, oh yeah, I found God and now I'm backpacking through the rainforest. I'm like, hell no, dude. It was difficult. It was heart-wrenching. There were moments, I've had several moments, in party hostels where I was like, what am I doing here? Where I had to remove myself from certain situations,
Right.
not because I was, a selfish motherfucker with no like willpower, but because, I don't know if I'm spiritually fit here, not sleeping for like 2 days, to handle this alcohol in this mini bar or whatever. Uh, but what it did for me is that it created, because I was alone, I was alone for a long time. I really wanted to not be alone for, most of it, but it ended up happening the way it did because I think I needed to develop a strong sense of, I am alone. All I have, I'm on this remote island. I only have my higher power, like I don't know, like a can of tuna to eat and like some water. Like that's all I got. And I need to make do with that. And I think it strengthened um my belief in God and also what eventually led
Right
to
on.
me. Yeah, amen. Like it led to me being deprogrammed from a lot of those fear-driven narratives that anyone is going to do this for me because that's just simply not true.
That sounds that sounds liberating, actually. So, I mean, I think your original question was right, like what it was like being a foreigner AA. And I get
Mhm.
to I listen to your story, and the contrast of it is like, so you're on your own, and like the God idea that you have and develop, right? That gets challenged, but then also strengthened, like in this environment where you're having to make it work, stranger in a strange land. And
Mhm.
I guess in a way, for me, it was like, so I'm in the clubhouse, which is the exact opposite. I'm in a room full of people, but then struggling to fit in like square peg and round hole. And we talked about that in a meeting recently, right? I can't remember how many times in early sobriety, one of those throwaway phrases, right? Everybody keeps telling me, look for the similarities, not the differences. Look for the similarities, not the
Ivy.
differences. And it's like I'm trying to figure out how not to bring race into this conversation. So I just won't, except for what I just said. But it's like I can't see anything but fucker. Like, I mean, there's human experiences, but then there is also like the cultural background and like how we grew up. And um I am not of this land where I'm getting sober. Like I can't get away from that no matter what. And so there is a lot that I can relate to, but not completely, you know? And so now being back, one of the experiences that I had recently was, you know, and I love the group of friends who we have, right? Like one of the things that I learned recently is not learned, but one of the things that's changed is my perception of time, specifically like sober time. And I know today that, you know, the amount of time that I have in recovery doesn't amount to me being um, like a five-star general or anything like that. It doesn't give me like a bigger soapbox to stand on.
Yeah.
Um, and so, you know, I did kind of cop an attitude for a while about dismissing that idea of time. And yet, you know, in a local recovery convention that I attended recently, one thing that I noticed, because they did the whole countdown thing, 50 years, 49 years, whatever, people would stand up, right? And those of us who are like jaded on time will just roll our eyes. But I noticed that it was a lot of those expats that were standing up 49, 48, 47 years, right? And they were very happy to be with each other. Um, and that was cool. And, you know, the locals, the natives were also clapping along. But it wasn't until they saw one of their own stand up with like 30 something years, right? It is what it is. And they were like, "Oh, I didn't know there was a Filipino that had that much time."
Mm.
And there was just like an extra connection, right? Like it didn't really resonate with them that here was another foreigner with a lot of substantial time, and I get it, it's the 12 steps and we do it. And but to see somebody who has the same kind of like experience as you, background as you know, who came from the same land, do the same thing, it makes it more real. It made it more real for me, and I can see how it resonates with them. Because I guess that's another part of like the colonization aspect of it. Like
Mm.
here, we bring this thing to you, and it's like, okay, I guess we'll take it. And actually, one of our friends, so like Leia O, I think, on the podcast was talking about how um AA lives or AA how AA is regarded in her European country where she is. And she said something to the fuck, I'm gonna hear it if I misquote. But I think it was essentially like it's seen as an American construct, like it's an
Mm.
American thing that was brought into the country, and people treat it um as more of a social thing. And
Yeah.
I can relate to that here. It is more social, it is more fellowship based, but it is also treated as this foreign thing that's been brought in, much like the religion that's predominant in the country, right? And so like, cool, we'll do it, but do we feel like a heart connection to it? Not really.
Wow. No, I mean, that is such, you just blew my mind because, like, first of all, what an interesting take and just really accurate, you know. And I think I also had some of that. I'm like, oh, this, we brought this. This girl went to the US and brought this thing in the 60s or whatever, and now it's a thing.
Nice.
Um, and I think again, when you said the similarities thing, the differences and similarities, I'm like, yeah, that's a big one because again, at the end of the day, alcoholism, you know, is a very defined thing in the
Right,
big book, right? Like this is your problem,
right,
this is your solution, this is the kind of drinker you are. Um, and again, there's sometimes this like misunderstanding that people have of like, oh, you know, my problem is that I'm an asshole. I'm like, no, I mean, maybe, but that's not the, this is not what we're talking about here.
right,
But I think that at the end of the day, like once you come from a different place, you know, or whatever your experience is, but especially if we're talking about third world countries
hmm,
or countries that, you know, come, you know, have a lot of war in them or whatever. Um, obviously, you know, like anyone's individual experiences and background, like you're going to have a different perception of a higher power and
right,
you're going to have a different perception of the steps. And one of the things that I said in a meeting or yeah, and what that wasn't well received is that I said that you know, this book is in the Bible. You want to read the Bible, go read the fucking Bible. And I think to me that stems from the disillusionment that I've had to have, that this fellowship is going to keep me sober, and these steps are some God-given thing. And that only happened once I experienced, like, for lack of a better word, like a um, um, like something that deeply impacted my country and
Yeah.
my personal life. I think I finally became reliant on a higher power once everything else was kind of stripped away. And that happened years into sobriety. So in a way, it was great, and it is like a wonderful thing. I don't know what I'm getting with this because I don't want to take away from anyone's experience, right? And say, oh,
Yeah.
I've went through this thing, so like I have this understanding of a higher power, but I can only speak from my experience is that um once I really just saw that nothing is certain, and I lost a lot of my faith, or the faith I had in the program, the big book thumper persona I had. Um, Only then I feel like I started to accept that I am here to serve God. I have this certainty that I'm alive today, and
Yeah.
that's wonderful. Right now, I'm alive, and as long as I'm alive, I have this power, and I want to do right by that power. Not because I'm going to get anything, because nothing is certain, and that only came from, you know, um, difficult circumstances for me. And again, I am not taking from anyone's experience or comparing anything, but that's what I can relate to when, I'm like, oh, I'm a foreigner in this, this is what I've
Right.
learned. Also, who do you share your 10 step with? Be mindful of that.
That sounds like that's gonna be a heavy other topic. There's so many topics. Something you said, specifically war. Um, that goes back to, so like I said, the convenience, right? And I mean, when I bottomed out, it was pretty miserable. But because I have this other experience, what I can say is it was
Mm,
miserable that I was also in America. And
there we go. There we go.
and it's just different. Like when we so I came back to my country, I came back to the Philippines, at a time when, and not too long ago, like within the last 6 years, people were um I don't know how to put this. Drug addicts were getting killed,
Yeah.
and it was kind of okayed, right? Like extrajudicial killings for drug dealers and even addicts were kind of a thing. And it's something you can look up in the news, but it's different too when you hear local law enforcement and politicians saying that, like, yeah, in your community, if you know anyone who's a drug dealer and you want to go ahead and put a bullet in their head, that's fine. We'll support you. And and so this is now what we're talking as, like, as a person in recovery from a very personal perspective. I'm now in a place that is unsafe, right? And this is a place, like, this country is a place that is not unfamiliar with war. I remember in 1986, because I'm that old, like, we had some stuff going on here where there was a revolution, and I'm driving by a mall on the way to school, and I'm seeing bullet holes, in structures, and it's like, what is that? Oh, it's some stray fire, and it's so casual because it happens. And then I come back and the same thing is happening, the same kind of violence, but it's specifically, it's hitting very close to home because these are people that I'm supposed to be helping with, and legitimate concerns, right? People not wanting to go to a meeting because they're like, are you sure there isn't anyone here who's like taking down our names?
Yeah.
People are scared. It's like a different level of fear, and in times like that, to kind of go off of what you said, you without God beside you, like there's nothing else. Because that's when things get darkest.
Yeah. That was, whew, I got emotional there. You can't see my face, but I got emotional there. And I think, this is why like this is important for me because setting aside the humor, or at least me trying to be funny, right? Because we have to laugh about these things. These are like really real things, and I think it's voices that I would personally would have loved to hear, and would love
Right.
to hear more. Um, and again, as you said, it's so personal to how I think we perceive the world, and how, I can say I even perceive the word recovered, you know, because I couldn't understand for the life of me how can I define myself as recovered, and still be in like, what is this, God? What is going on? You know, all those sober people who got, shot, like, or whatever tragedy it is you're going through.
Hmm.
Like, we have to, and it's about coming to terms with that, and in a way also be like, okay, but what can I do in my own personal bubble? What can I do with sponsees? And what perspective does this give me about my recovery and my life and my sobriety?
Right.
I have a very good friend, my best friend in recovery, and he says to me, well, OyveyAA, because it's my name. Uh,
That's
to
funny.
me, he says like, but isn't it better to cry in a tropical island than to cry in a bomb shelter? Um,
Wow, 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 wow.
and I get very fearful, like everyone.
Hmm.
And I have to remember that, and I have to remember that for a reason, I have this other perspective that I need to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's that's humbling, right? To even like think about or try to have to fathom or try to fathom somebody else going through. But that's a real choice in the world, or that's a real
I think it's
situation
a
in the
choice in
world.
attitude. And
Is it a
and it's a
choice in
choice in
attitude?
I can say that I had a shitty attitude for a good amount of time. I'm not sure what changed. I think a big part of what's changed, not only, the company that I keep, but also understanding that I can't keep going with this attitude because I'm not being helpful to
Yeah.
anyone,
But
while
it's a
having this
reality.
attitude.
Yeah, I think what I was saying was like it's a reality that it's just a reality, and it's not to picture somebody like having to think about tropical island or bomb shelter, right? It's not every day for most people in the fellowship, but it is something that people face. And so when you say like it's important to hear those voices, I agree. And hence
Mhm.
another reason why, we get to have conversations like this because like fuck it, like my first year, right? It was my first sponsor was a single man and I was in the middle of getting a divorce and he like with wisdom beyond his years, I guess, was like I can't really help you with that because I don't have the experience, but you can find someone in the rooms. Like find somebody like go out and get some phone numbers and maybe you'll find somebody who's a divorce lawyer or someone who can help you with your finances because it's not going to be me. And I was like,
Mm,
cool, phone a friend, right? But then there are other experiences where your neighborhood AA is not going to be not going to be helpful to you, and you just relayed one. Like so, you know, any place where I
Oh,
was
wow,
in,
yeah.
like, what do you do? Like, okay, so I got this problem. There's a friend who I have who's afraid that he's going to be sent away and shot by some like masked man. What do I do? Like,
Yeah.
there's no,
It's not in the big book, right?
it's not in the big book at fucking
I
all.
shared about it and people were pissed off. I remember I was crying at a meeting, which I try not to do anymore. For many reasons, because we have to be mindful of where we share things, and who
Right.
we share it with and what are the tools we have. And like maybe it's better to do a 10 step about it than to share about any meeting. But I did. I dumped, you know. I would advise to anyone to go to a meeting and, probably try and pick up some sponsees, but I trauma dumped in my local fellowship here.
Mm,
And I said exactly those words. I said, there is nothing in the big book to deal with. I said some graphic stuff
yeah.
about how my friends died. And one of the key experiences I think that helped me reshape or kind of change my attitude was to be able to ask recovered people, hey, like people who I know are recovered, what do you do when you have a crisis of faith? And
Mm,
having people like reflect back at me, I'm like, hey, like this experience made me also have a crisis of faith. And I almost went out over it. I'm like, oh, so I'm not Jesus or
yeah.
Moses.
Or Moses. Take your pick.
Sorry, this is let's be very clear. I'm Jewish. If you haven't figured it out by now, I
Yeah, a few minutes in.
a few minutes in,
I remember
an
my
hour in.
first an hour in. You made me remember my like oh fuck, there's no way to make this sound better. My first Jewish
Go
friend.
ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
My,
Fuck
my
this.
first my first Jewish friend in middle school.
Oh
He
man,
was he
fuck.
was he was very curious about it was seventh grade, and he was very curious about like Catholic Roman Catholic practices, even though I was not that great of a practitioner, right? And so we talked about confession, and I told him what I had been experiencing with that, which was very fresh in my seventh grade, experience. And he was like, you have to do all that. I mean, you're either gonna tell me that he was right on or he's full of shit, but he's like, you have to do all of that. Like, yeah, I don't have to do any of that. I just like we have this direct line with our God, and then that's kind of it. And I was so
Hmm.
fucking mad. I was like, you don't have to go into this magical phone booth and have this awkward conversation with this older man,
Hmm.
like
That
separated by
is
a thin wall. He's like,
interesting.
no, I just talk directly to my God. And honestly, I joke about it, but
Hmm.
that's pretty much my experience with God today, right? Which I found through this program. It's like
Oh man.
I don't need a go-between, like I don't need an agent, you know. It can absolutely be like that. Obviously, that conversation stayed with me all these years because it did feel right, and it feels right today. And to your point, being able to talk to people who have had a crisis of faith, um, it helps. I mean, for me, it kind of still helps if they can relate to the type of trauma just a little bit. Um, but but who also have that strength of faith because of what they've experienced in recovery, um, brings it back to like who's really keeping me sober, who I'm really relying on.
Ooh,
But it's so
full circle,
full
bro.
circle, but it's such a difficult. I hear you, right? Like when certain things are happening, like when it's monstrous, then all I can hear in my head is like, but why?
Hmm.
And, in an emotional state, it can be very difficult to just surrender to the fact that I don't have control over these things because all I want is understanding.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I mean, God, I could certainly relate to that experience. I use the word illusion of control a lot. Um, because I think it's just a human thing, but I don't have it. And again, my belief of what my higher power is, I mean, it always changes, right? Because it's a personal relationship, but it
Yeah,
had to change. It had to
had to
change. It had to
change.
be less give and take. Um, for sure. And I just love that you mentioned the confessional thing. You brought up like this suppressed memory I had from rehab.
They made you go to confession?
No, God, almost. God, yeah. Please, yeah. This is, oh my God, so funny. Um, no, I just remember it was after I relapsed, right? Because I had the experience of being clean for a little while. And I didn't do anything, right?
Mm.
COVID happened, I got clean. It was kind of around the same time. And then I relapsed and I had like a really bad experience and I went to rehab. And I remember I harmed a lot of people. And I really wanted this Christian concept that I never really understood, right? Because like
That's
I did
interesting.
not read the new I did not read the New Testament, sorry.
I didn't either. We have that in common.
I know you never read the New Testament. No, I never, I'm so like not informed on it, but like I really wanted someone to come and like cleanse me of my sins because that's how I viewed confession. And
Yeah.
that happened. It happened through doing the clear-cut directions in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got my clean slate, through doing the work. As you said, I didn't need a middleman. Um, yeah, yeah,
That's awesome.
it
And
is.
the idea of God changing, that came up today. So
Hmm.
like I went to an in-person meeting. It is February, so the daily reflection was on step 2, which is
Wait,
actually
wait. Pirate
um
Mike, do you go to meetings?
I love meetings. I'm one of those people. I do. I know we know some people who like, and I felt
You
a
heard
little
it
bit
here
like,
first.
I do,
Pirate
I love
Mike
meetings.
goes to meetings.
I do. And because I have the experience of what they talk about in that story, the end of the story of AA number 3, when he's talking about like Bill saying, what does he say? Um, the Lord has been so kind to me, curing me of this terrible disease that I just want to keep talking about it with people. And that's
Mm,
kind of what I find today. So, whatever, they could be talking about their, the bitch of a time they're having at home or just talking about their day, but an opportunity to like just talk about this with people. And I am finding more and more people who are actually more program centered. Whatever, this is going off the rails, but I enjoy meetings today. And um, so we were talking about step 2, which is actually a nice tie into this conversation that we're having. And something that I hear a lot, and I don't know if it's true, but I always assume that it's because of the predominant religion here is like there's a lot of like God's not giving me more than I can handle.
mm.
Why are you doing this to me, God? And like things like that, right? And my understanding of God today and just today is that like God's not giving me burdens, right? My understanding of free will, and it's not just me, but all of us have it, right?
Hmm.
Is like I'm making a choice to either like move towards God and what that looks like, so higher power centered living or not, or I'm making a choice to move back towards self. And you multiply that black and white choice to everyone, and what you get is collision every day. Everybody making a free will choice and just colliding. And that's not God. That's just people having experience. What God to me is like when I can muster faith through even the most terrible of those collisions. God to me is how I can still experience moments of inspiration. I can still hold on enough to see an unexpected blessing. So like when I'm going through difficulty, it's not something that's being given to me by God because he's trying to force a lesson.
Mm.
The lesson is the grace that I get when I seek God. God is the course correction. God is the shelter, right? That I get.
Preach, brother.
Like that.
Honestly, no, I love it. I love it. And it's I love talking about free will and free choice. I felt in the last few months like I kept saying I feel like a newcomer in the way that my emotions were out of control. And I
Mm.
felt like I was looking at this abyss or like this cliff, and I'm like, is this where I jump back in? But
Oh,
what
wow.
ended up happening is, and I saw it very clearly as a choice, and me getting sober and me being recovered allowed me to have free choice, right? I am not enslaved to, you know, what is it like king alcohol,
Yeah.
right? I'm not enslaved to this thing anymore. And every day I get free choice, right? Because I believe in God. So I get free choice to either choose that higher power, you know, to, God couldn't would if you were sought, right? To seek. I think, does it come from the word seek? Sought?
Yeah, yeah.
Hit me up. Yeah. Hit me up on the on the regions of the world sought in
Sidebar.
the within the 1930s dictionary. But if I seek God, that's my free choice. That's the free choice I have. And sometimes it's a very difficult free choice, right? Like faith is not for like for the weak. And when I got on that plane, I really thought I was gonna die. And I felt like no one was really rooting for me. But I had the free choice to, despite me feeling it, something greater than myself that I still didn't have a clear understanding of told me, hey, like, you need to do this thing, and this thing is somehow related to your understanding of freedom. It's not that when I left, I've suddenly gotten freedom, you know? It wasn't the act of leaving, it was, I think, the act of choosing. Um Yeah, Pirate Mike is reacting on the Zoom call. But that's what it was, and there were so many awesome understandings. I thought when I left, I didn't really want to go back, right? In my heart of hearts, I never really wanted to go back for so many different reasons. But it's not like I found this home within myself. I mean, that happened from work in the program. That happened from doing the step work, you know. Um, I found that wherever I went, not only did I have the fellowship, and I understand what you're saying, as much as I shit on meetings, I've had wonderful experiences in meetings as well, and also not wonderful
You heard it here
experiences. Yeah.
first.
Oh man, like I'm gonna get so much. Oh man. Okay. No, but honestly, the home thing is that I ended up having a home wherever I went because my higher power was wherever I went. You know, even that if it's, even if an Eskimo like offers me alcohol.
Right.
I've had people offer me like cocaine and shit, like, and where I traveled. It doesn't matter. So if I can say anything is go and fucking do it. And one of the more humbling, awesome things that happened for me was that when I went back home, I had to go back home for like 2 months for this like medical procedure. But I did go to a meeting and I did share and I did make some connections with people, and people ended up going and traveling and ended up being in contact with me while doing it, and going out of this indoctrinated place to like, hey, I'm 20, maybe I should backpack through Chile if I want to, you know? Like, and it's great. And even my best friend, who I had a very difficult conversation with before I left, and I felt very hurt by him not being supportive. We talked about it, it's all good, right? But he ended up, a year later backpacking in Vietnam for
Wow.
months and like going all through Asia. And I'm like, isn't that amazing, right? Like, take your freedom, take your higher power and fucking go. And I'm aware that I have this privilege. Not a lot of people get to do that. But please, don't let fear um like stop you, because it's being self-reliant, and like God can do this for you. Why not? You know?
I feel like that's the tagline. Take your freedom, take your higher power, and fucking go. For
There
real
we go.
though.
We found our tagline, Pirate Mike. Any last thoughts before we wrap this awesome thing that I have no idea if it's even coherent?
I mean, I don't know about coherent, but I know it's been inspirational. I'm so thankful for this. This is, yeah, you spoke to an experience, I think, that is like right out of what we read, and it's bigger, right? It's bigger than whatever's between like those two covers. And
Hmm.
take your freedom, take your higher power, and fucking go. Here we go.
Fucking go.